Welcome to my channel people. Author link will be on description, make sure to check it out. I can't believe someone could actually have so much impact on two hidden villages without anyone even knowing his real identity, spoke Mei with a distressed look on her face, and the other hidden mist ninjas felt the same. Indeed, that's why I suggest our two villages enter an alliance. We can help you get your village up on its feet, spoke Bakurio calmly, and Yagura stared at him silently before he asked, "What do you want in exchange?" "I love talking to smart people," thought Bakurio with a smile before he said to everyone in the room, "I want you to become allies with Konoha and assist us in our time of need with both material and human resources, but this isn't something that will be done by mere words." Zabuza frowned at this and asked, "What do you mean?" Bakurio leaned back on his chair and said with a shrug, "You see, my poor village wanted peace since a long time ago. However, every time it puts its trust in a certain village, they end up getting betrayed. So, to not repeat an old mistake, I devised a method so that no one could renege on their promises. Are you saying that our village can't be trusted?" Spoke Ao with a stern look on his face, and Bakurio paused slightly and turned to stare at him coldly before he disappeared from his seat and punched him in the face, sending him flying through the wall of the conference room and far into the distance where he couldn't see him anymore. Then, he turned to the shocked people in the room and said awkwardly, "Sorry, he was getting on my nerves. Now where was I?" After saying this, Bakurio went back to his seat as if nothing had happened while the room remained silent as the people either stared at him in shock or were gulping in fear. "I guess he deserved it," thought Mei, trying to convince herself that this wasn't Bakurio's fault so they don't have to fight this monster. "Oh, that's right, I was saying that I devised a method to make sure any agreement we make can't be broken. If you are interested we can make a deal right away." Yagura ignored the breeze hitting him on the face from the new human-shaped window on the wall and said, "What kind of method is this?" Bakurio smiled at him warmly and said, "It's simple, the Kage and two other important members of each village will each sign a special form of contract called a soul contract. And once you do, anyone who breaks the agreement will be punished by death." Direct and simple, Bakurio's three students stared at their teacher in fear and they couldn't help but think, "So this is how sensei deals with other people, and we thought he was harsh on us. That guy with the Byakugan is probably dead by now. How can we trust that this isn't something to trick us and won't actually harm the people of your village?" Spoke Zabuza coldly, and Bakurio couldn't help but narrow his eyes at him and say, "Well, I won't be giving you the method of producing that contract, that's for sure. However, we can test its effect on that annoying guy and you will see firsthand how it works." Zabuza felt a chill while being stared by Bakurio's blood-red eyes and decided to remain silent while Mei quickly said, "Let's not kill Ao please, he's still an important member of our village. TCH. Bakurio clicked his tongue in dissatisfaction, which made the other ninja move away from him slightly while Yagura spoke. "I'm willing to trust you, but this isn't a decision I can make for the village anymore since I don't deserve to be its leader. We should have a vote." "Sure, suit yourself," spoke Bakurio before he left the room with his students to let them discuss between themselves on how they should handle this situation. "Best, sensei, is the village okay with all of this? Wasn't our mission just a reconnaissance mission to see what was going inside of Kiri? This is already going out of hand," whispered Naruto in Bakurio's ear as he finally realized that this mission was probably at least S rank. Bakurio stared at Naruto with a bewildered look before he spoke, "You're the last person I expected to have a sense of reason. It seems like the world is ending tomorrow." Naruto pouted after hearing this while Sasuke and Hinata chuckled at the remark, and Bakurio couldn't help but smile slightly and poke Naruto in the head before he said, "Don't worry. This will benefit the village and Fugaku will definitely agree to it." Hearing this, Naruto nodded reluctantly, but Sasuke asked him with a worried look on his face, "Sensei, is it true that father might die if he breaks the agreement?" Bakurio remained silent for a while before he spoke, "Yes, he will, otherwise it wouldn't be fair. But don't worry, your father won't have any reason to break it." These words didn't help to ease Sasuke's worries and he remained silent after that, and so did the other two as the mood grew heavier, and it wasn't just theirs as the others were also having a heated argument about whether to agree or not to this deal. After a few minutes, Yagura approached Yuki and said, "We want to first meet with the 5th Hokage before we make our final decision." It seems like they are already willing to agree, but they want to talk to Fugaku in hope of getting more benefits out of him, huh? Fugaku's stoic face ended up appearing on Bakuryo's head, which brought a smile to his face as he found their efforts laughable. After all, Fugaku was even harder to deal with than himself. "Sure, you can send some people with us back to the village if you want," said Bakuryo, and Yagura immediately nodded and said, "Zabuza, ow, and I will go with you. I think we are high level enough to fulfill your condition, right?" Bakuryo shot Mei a weird look and she averted her eyes away from him and he couldn't help but smirk. They didn't ask Mei to come along with them in case this is some sort of trap, huh? Not bad, having a smart ally can have its own benefits. Yup, that would be enough, as long as that guy keeps his mouth shut on the way, said Bakuryo with a smile, and Yagura nodded back at him, relieved that Mei doesn't have to participate in this. Sorry, ow, he thought before they started making their way back to Konoha. Back at Konoha, negotiations went poorly for the Kiri trio. However, they ended up agreeing to the agreement after seeing Konoha's power, which would be very useful for them to have as a backing until their village recovers back from its self-inflicted wounds. After everything was over, Bakuryo went to Yagura and asked to meet his tailed beast Isobu. Surprisingly, it agreed right away, which ended with Bakuryo inside Yagura's seal space. Unlike Kurama's seal space, which used to have a huge door to keep Kurama at bay, Yagura's seal space didn't have any restrictions on Isobu other than keeping him inside of Yagura. "Young man, thank you for freeing me from that masked man's control," spoke Isobu to Bakuryo, who was observing his giant tortoise-like appearance. "You are welcome, I couldn't bear to see one of Kurama's siblings being manipulated against his will," spoke Bakuryo with a smile which surprised Isobu as he said, "Kurama. Do you know him?" "Well, yay, I actually freed him a long time ago," spoke Bakuryo again, which surprised Isobu even more. "Impossible, didn't he cause too much trouble to your village?" he asked, and Bakuryo simply shrugged at him and said, "You can communicate with him and confirm this if you want. Sorry, I didn't mean it that way. Is there anything I can repay you with?" "Unfortunately, I already have a Jinchuriki, so you should ask for something else," spoke Isobu apologetically, which made Bakuryo smile before he said, "I don't need anything from you. I just want to be your friend." Isobu's eyes widened slightly and he couldn't help but approach his giant head to Bakuryo's face, but he couldn't see any hint of falsehood in his eyes, so he calmly nodded at him, and just as he did, a notification appeared in front of Bakuryo. Quest: Friend of a Tailed Beast 2. Befriend 2 tailed beasts from this world. Reward 1000 points plus ability, Exoskeleton M. I didn't expect to get an ability from Isobu instead of some kind of inheritance like Kurama, muttered Bakuryo to himself before he clicked on the description of the ability. Exoskeleton grants the user the ability to manifest an exoskeleton that covers their body like armor, and its toughness depends on the host's physical attribute. Phi X2. Amazing, this is an amazing ability, especially since it could scale even more when I increase my attributes. It reminds me of that bastard Seryu, thought Yuki, and he couldn't help but think about those tough scales he couldn't even make a crack on despite him using all of his strength. However, a smile soon adorned his face as he thought, "It seems like my decision to befriend the tailed beasts was right. This is the best way I have to grow stronger quickly." With his goal with Yagura achieved, Bakuryo decided to try and establish a friendship with the rest of the tailed beasts as well as the hidden villages that housed them if possible, and while he was thinking about who should be his next target, somewhere in a hidden location, two men were currently having a talk. "Madara, what should we do now?" asked Kisame to Obito, since they lost their hold over the hidden mist village and the existence of Bakuryo worried him slightly. Obito too was concerned about this, and he couldn't help but think, "I didn't expect that kid to grow so fast. If I knew things were going to end up like this, I would have killed him a long time ago and got rid of his threat. At this rate, our plans are going to be impossible to achieve. It seems like I should try to mobilize Nagato and see if he could get rid of that brat." As countless plans were running through Obito's head, his blood-red right eye suddenly shined brightly before he said, "Don't worry, nothing can stop our purpose," before he used his Kamui and teleported them away to the land of rain. Meanwhile, back at his home, Kushina kept lecturing Bakuryo about the danger he put the kids on, which he simply filtered as background noise, which earned him a kick from the dangerous woman, and he ended up landing on the couch beside Minato, who simply smiled at him and said, "You did well. I didn't expect we could gain an ally just like that. Those soul contracts we designed thanks to your Mangekyo Sharingan's ability are truly a game changer in terms of assuring that agreements do not get broken." Bakurio nodded at him and leaned back on the couch beside him, and he couldn't help but remember how many experiments they had to do to successfully seal Bakurio's Yomi no Kuni's white chain ability that could affect souls inside a scroll. After all, this contract was a very complicated formation that Minato, Kushina, and Bakurio invented by sealing Bakurio's ability in it and using it to ingest Bakurio's white chain inside the user's souls. However, that chain was accompanied by seals that contained the agreement of the contract, and in the case that it was broken, that chain would immediately destroy that person's soul. Indeed, however, this will cause some waves for both the hidden organizations as well as the other hidden villages, as they will feel threatened by us. Spoke Bakurio, and Minato nodded at him seriously. Indeed, this will break the current balance of power the other hidden villages believe they have with us, and it might push them into becoming allies. Bakurio nodded at Minato's assessment before he said, "That's why we need to make a move, and we need to make it quick. By the way, how's your sage training going?" Minato nodded at Bakurio before he said with a smile, "I already mastered both the snake sage arts and the dog sage arts. However, I'm not sure I could deal with the rest, especially the slug sage art, as it's very demanding on the body." Bakurio nodded at Minato and was already satisfied with his progress during these past 2 years. From the moment he decided to gather as many powerful allies as possible, Bakurio decided to help the closest people to him get stronger to the best of his ability. He of course helped them reach the full potential of their bodies through the use of his dark chakra, but he also advised them on what they could do to get stronger. Both Guy and Kakashi mastered a sage art already, so he asked them to try to develop new jutsu they could use along with their new sage chakra, and they were having success already, as Guy created a new terrifying taijutsu while Kakashi's fighting style became much more deadlier. "I think it's time to go see your third student. He's probably going to cause us a lot of trouble soon if we don't interrupt him." Minato's eyes suddenly lit up and he instantly stood up, which attracted Kushina's attention despite her being distracted by Naruto telling her about his adventure and how valiantly he fought, while she almost puked her heart out of nervousness. "Are you sure?" asked Minato, and Bakurio nodded at him with a smile and said, "I'm sure. If my guess is correct, we might end up catching another big fish as well." Minato narrowed his eyes at this before he nodded and stood up to wear his long coat, and Kushina instantly appeared in front of them and said, "I will go with you too." Minato stared at her calmly in the eyes, and seeing her strong determination, he ended up nodding at her. "Naruto, go stay with Sasuke. We are going out for a while." Naruto was about to childishly disagree and ask them to take him with them, but he suddenly stopped when he noticed the sad looks on his parents' faces and ended up swallowing his words and simply nodded, which brought a smile to Bakurio's face. "This kid is clever, he's only playing dumb most of the time, when in reality, he's very smart and perceptive." Minato and Kushina as well appreciated Naruto's reaction, and the latter ruffled his hair lovingly before Minato put his hands on both of their shoulders and teleported them away directly to Obito's location. This was of course thanks to the mark Minato left on him during their fight years ago. Obito was currently having a meeting with Pain and Konan and discussing the idea of him joining the Akatsuki along with Kisame, when suddenly, the only visible eye from the hole of his mask suddenly widened in surprise as 3 familiar figures appeared in front of him. However, he was mainly attracted to Minato and Kushina, as he couldn't believe his eyes that they were still alive. This situation was simply way out of his imagination. Are these two some kinds of fakes? No, how can anyone fake their chakra signature? And they are with this guy of all people. Obito quickly thought, as Pain, who was similarly shocked, suddenly spoke. "I never thought I would end up meeting the Yellow Flash and his wife. Seems like someone revived you from the dead." He shot Bakurio a look when he finished his sentence, clearly indicating that he was probably the one behind this, and Bakurio didn't deny it as he simply smiled at Pain as Kushina whispered into his ear. "Who are these people?" This whisper was heard by everyone, and it ended up causing the tense mood to erupt as Minato instantly disappeared and attacked Obito, while Bakurio simply said, "This is the leader of the Akatsuki, Pain, or to be more precise, Nagato Uzumaki." The moment Bakurio uttered Pain's true name, both Minato and Kushina had 2 completely different reactions. "Uzumaki," muttered Kushina as she remembered her massacred clan and couldn't believe that the man in front of her was another surviving member of it. Meanwhile, Minato had an astonished look on his face as he clearly recognized this name, the name of none other than his teacher's student whom he never met, and seeing the appearance of Conan that was standing beside him, he couldn't help but remember how Jiraiya always bragged about how beautiful she was with her blue hair. While Minato was clashing with Obito, Pain suddenly spoke with a surprised tone, "How do you know who I am?" Conan also raised her guard and started conjuring all kinds of weapons that were floating in the air and ready to be released at any moment. "You should know that Danzo is dead, right?" spoke Bakurio, to which Pain responded with a nod and said, "Indeed, it's unfortunate that I didn't get to kill him with my own hands. I found some information recorded in his intel regarding a trio that were leading a revolution against Hanzo in the Land of Rain, and he tried to kill them a long time ago, and they were none other than Jiraiya students. Your appearance matches perfectly, especially those special eyes of yours, so it's easy to guess your identity." Bakurio's eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of the Rinnegan, and Conan noticed this, so she immediately attacked them with her paper weapons. "Can you handle her, Kushina?" asked Bakurio calmly, and Kushina smirked at him before she said, "I also grew far stronger during these past 2 years. Don't underestimate me." After saying this, Kushina created a strong windshield that blocked Conan's attacks. However, she noticed that they contained explosive seals, so she quickly extended the reach of her shield to protect them before she pushed Conan away with a wind blast and dragged her to a different battlefield. "I'm not here to fight you. In fact, I have a great offer for you," spoke Bakurio calmly, still not moving from his initial position, but he noticed that Kisame was acting sneaky behind him and preparing to attack him. "Konoha is the last place I want to make any deals with," replied Pain coldly before he raised his hand and used the attraction force of his Rinnegan to drag Bakurio toward him. "I guess a fight is unavoidable then," spoke Bakurio with a sigh before he allowed himself to be dragged towards Pain, who manifested a black rod into his hand and tried to stab it into Bakurio's chest. However, different than the usual sensation of penetrating flesh, this time his rod found a strong hindrance in the form of a gray exoskeleton that covered Bakurio's chest. "Not bad, but I guess this is to be expected as my physical attribute has passed the 1000 mark," thought Bakurio with a smile before he used his gentle palm taijutsu to attack this Pain. Although he noticed that his chakra was finding some difficulty in penetrating his tough body to block his tenketsu, and Kisame, who quickly reacted and attacked him from the back, didn't give him too much time to work with. Not long after, the other 5 Pains quickly rushed to attack Bakurio as well, but he simply smiled and thought, "This won't be the same fight as my time during the war." Meanwhile, as Obito and Minato clashed, the former suddenly spoke with a deep voice, "How did you get revived? Your soul should be trapped in the Death Reaper, making it even more difficult." Minato stared at Obito with a bitter smile on his face and spoke, "It seems like you aren't glad to see me." Obito's eyes flickered slightly at the hidden meaning behind this sentence, but he quickly regained his calm and spoke, "It's fine, I will just have to kill you and your wife once more." Hearing this, Minato's bitter expression turned completely cold as he activated his Snake Sage mode, increasing his speed to unimaginable degrees before he dropped a kunai on his current location and rushed at Obito. "This one's work," spoke Obito before he used his Kamui to make his body intangible, which was in reality just sending it to his other dimension. However, this didn't stop Minato, who created a giant Rasengan on top of his palm and pushed it at his stomach. "I will win this time," thought Obito, as he prepared for every possible scenario of Minato's possible appearing locations as he watched him pass through his body. However, he never expected Minato to disappear mid-attack while he was still completely intangible. "Wait, don't tell me." Before he could even react, his intangibility was suddenly cancelled as he found himself coughing blood from a huge wound that appeared on his back, and he stumbled forward toward the kunai that Minato dropped before attacking him, and unsurprisingly, Minato appeared from it and stabbed Obito's stomach with his hand that was covered in chakra and cast a seal on his body that hindered him from using his chakra properly. Having received such a serious injury, Obito struggled to stand from the ground and glared at Minato, who appeared in front of him with his blue eyes shining coldly. "You actually teleported directly into my dimension. How did you know that this wasn't my physical body?" Minato shook his head at him before he deactivated his Sage mode and said, "After our first fight, I thought a lot about your weird intangibility and I eventually understood. Your body is transported to a different dimension, but an image of you remains here, and you can't fully disappear while you are under attack. However, your body in that dimension can still receive damage." Obito coughed up more blood after hearing this answer, and he couldn't help but wonder, am I really not going to ever surpass teacher? He even gained a new Sage mode. However, Obito realized that this wasn't the time for any of this and tried to divert Minato's attention. You better go help your wife and that kid or they will end up dying at the hands of pain. That guy is far stronger than you can imagine. Those eyes aren't just for show, spoke Obito with a threatening tone, and Minato couldn't help but chuckle at him and said, "Don't worry, I fully trust in Kushina and Bakurio." After saying this, they suddenly heard an explosion which made Obito smirk under his mask. It seems like Konan had already made her move. However, a silhouette soon made her way away from the sound of the ongoing fighting, and it wasn't who Obito was expecting, at least not in their current situation, as he watched in surprise Kushina approaching them with Konan tied in her adamantine sealing chains. "Already done?" asked Kushina, and Minato nodded at her before he turned to the injured Obito and extended his hand to remove the mask from his face with a bitter look. Kushina too had a similar look on her face as her eyes watered slightly while watching the familiar face that was always hidden under the mask staring at them coldly, and it pained her heart as she muttered in a soft voice while Obito's current face kept overlapping with his younger self in her mind, "Obito." Obito laughed at her before he said, "Obito died a long time ago, today I'm Toby." Nothing more, nothing less. Kushina couldn't help but shed some tears while Minato closed his eyes silently before he said, "Sorry for failing you," before a tear also fell from his closed eyes. After all, he really disappointed all of his students and none of them led a happy life. "It really is you," muttered Minato absent-mindedly while staring at Obito's familiar face. Even though he expected this since he fully trusted Bakurio's words, it was still a huge shock to him that this student of his was still alive. "It seems like you already knew about my true identity before you even removed my mask. Was it that Uchiha kid?" asked Obito calmly despite his terrible situation. Minato realized that he slipped up just now and revealed too much information, but it didn't even matter as he simply shook his head and said, "Where were you all this time? How did you survive back then? Kakashi and Rin were both sure that you died." Obito remained silent before he replied, "It doesn't matter anymore, I lost everything, but I also gained strength to reach far beyond what you can imagine," responded Obito, and suddenly, 10 white Zetsu appeared from the ground under him, taking Minato by surprise as he deactivated his Sage mode and wasn't able to sense them. And the terrifying thing about this is that they each held countless explosives and were ready to obliterate Obito. "This is bad, I won't be able to stop them in time, what should I do?" wondered Minato, but suddenly, a white ray of light passed through each white Zetsu and turned them into mere particles, before a voice echoed from the distance, "Trying to rely on Izanagi to save yourself. That won't work as long as I'm here." Minato and Kushina turned their attention to the source of this voice only to see Bakurio along with some of his normal shadow clones dragging a few chained people along with him, and they included Nagato's true body and Kisame. This. Impossible. How could he beat all of them so quickly? What kind of monster is this? Obito couldn't help but stare at Bakurio's eyes, and all he saw was an emptiness that could swallow souls. Minato nodded at Bakurio in appreciation before he turned his attention to Obito and asked, "Answer me. What happened back then?" However, Obito simply closed his eyes and remained silent, prompting Bakurio to approach Minato and say, "He won't answer. Or to be clearer, he can't answer." Obito's eyes opened quickly and he couldn't help but stare at Bakurio in astonishment. Who are you?" Bakurio tilted his head at him before he said, "Just an unlucky soul dragged into a huge mess." Then Obito's eyes widened in horror, and it was shared by Minato and Kushina as they watched Bakurio raise his finger, and they could see light condensing on it to the point that it became blinding to the eye. "What are you doing, Bakurio-kun?" yelled Kushina and tried to stop him, but Minato suddenly held her back and watched silently. Meanwhile, Bakurio suddenly aimed his finger at Obito's heart before he shot a very thin laser ray that penetrated directly through his heart and came out of his back. Coughing up blood, Obito felt like he was going to die and was prepared to activate his Izanagi, but he waited patiently to see what was going to happen next. There must a reason for him to aim at the seal that Madara secretly put on me to control me. And his guess wasn't wrong, as the moment Obito was about to fall to the ground, Bakurio caught him and cast a regeneration spell on him that quickly started healing his inert heart as well as back. "How did you know about the seal?" asked Obito, not trying to fight since he knew he had no way to escape this situation with Minato's mark still on his back. What's going on Bakurio-kun, do you know anything? Asked Minato, who released Kushina that tried to save Obito, which didn't go unnoticed by Obito, and he felt a weird sensation in his heart, guilt. This of course didn't escape Bakurio's notice as he calmly replied to Minato. Back during that incident more than 10 years ago, Obito was saved by an old man. And that old man was none other than Madara Uchiha. Minato and Kushina felt like a bomb was dropped on their heads as they always thought that Madara was killed by Hashirama, but now they were hearing a completely different story. Impossible, wasn't Madara supposed to be dead? Asked Kushina, to which Bakurio simply stared at Obito, and it was Minato whose eyes lit up and responded to her, "Don't tell me. Did he use Izanagi to trick Lord Hashirama?" Bakurio nodded at Minato before he pointed at Obito and said, "After saving Obito, he put this seal in his heart to control him, but it seems like you already discovered it, right Obito?" Obito didn't respond to Bakurio and only stared at him in shock as he thought, "Did Black Zetsu betray me? What's going on? How does he know all of this private information?" Meanwhile, Bakurio was contemplating something else after remembering what he found out after analyzing Obito's seal from a distance using his Byakugan. Don't tell me. Did Madara figure out something about the dark seeds and actually created a seal based on their working? I guess I'm starting to understand a little bit about his purpose. He probably already knew that fighting that darkness was impossible, and seeing himself and the people of this world getting corrupted slowly by it, he decided to put them all in the eternal Tsukuyomi to free them from all that misery. I guess I'm not the only one who had the Jikaninki ability, he probably had it as well. This realization surprised Bakurio a lot, especially to think that someone had a similar ability to his. All of these thoughts just took a second for Bakurio to process, and seeing Obito remain silent, he suddenly spoke, "I will let you guys catch up, I'm sure there are plenty of things you need to ask him." "Where are you going?" asked Minato suddenly, which brought a smile to Bakurio's face as he said, "I need to talk to a sneaky guy." Then he instantly disappeared with a terrifying speed as he activated his Snake Sage mode and rushed at a nearby tree and broke through it, revealing Black Zetsu hiding inside. With a panicked look on his face, Black Zetsu prepared to run away, but Bakurio instantly caught him and froze his lower half with ice release before he said, "Don't be afraid, I just want to talk, plus you already saw my fight with pain. Running away isn't an option, what do you want from me? I'm just a low-ranking member of the Akatsuki, I can tell you anything regarding the organization, quickly selling your comrades as expected of the person that would easily betray anyone to achieve his goal." Thought Bakurio as he checked his surroundings before he summoned two clones, and each of them created a different type of barrier. The first used a magnet release to block any sound from entering or leaving, and the second used the light release to completely block the view on the area, and even the Byakugan wouldn't be able to see through it. "Now that this place is isolated, we can talk freely," spoke Bakurio, and Black Zetsu meekly replied, Sure, what do you want to know?" Bakurio had a wide smile on his face as he spoke, "How's your mission to revive Kagaya currently going?" Black Zetsu's meek appearance suddenly disappeared and was replaced by a cold and calculating one as he asked, "Who are you?" Bakurio stared at the moon that was slowly rising in the sky, which further increased Black Zetsu's wariness before he said, "Just a drowning man trying to help another drowning man." Black Zetsu saw the empty look in Bakurio's eyes and an image of Kagaya suddenly superimposed with his face, which made his heart shake slightly as he thought, "Why am I feeling this way? Is this some kind of jutsu?" Black Zetsu was confused by the intentions of the young man in front of him, however his instincts were telling him that he could trust him. Although he didn't know that those weren't purely his instincts, as Bakurio's blood-red eyes stared deeply into his very soul and influenced him slightly with his Jikaninki. "What do you want?" asked Black Zetsu hesitantly, to which Bakurio smiled and said, "I want the same thing that you want, to free Kagaya. Although my methods and yours aren't quite the same." "How does he know my true plan? Not even Madara know it, how could a descendant of his know?" wondered Black Zetsu, so he decided to test Bakurio's knowledge. "How do you plan to do that?" Bakurio understood his intention, but he didn't mind as he spoke, "You can connect to her soul, right?" Black Zetsu was surprised before he shook his head. "No, not in the current state of things, since her seal completely isolates her from the outside world." I guess this is why in the original story he didn't make a move until Madara activated the eternal Tsukuyomi. It probably broke her seal just like my eternal Jikaninki and allowed her soul to travel back from the moon. Many thoughts flashed through Bakurio's head before he spoke. What if I take you directly to the moon? Asked Bakurio, to which Black Zetsu shook his head again. You won't be able to break that seal. It was made through the combined effort of the Sage of Six Paths and his brother, so breaking it is almost impossible. Bakurio could feel Black Zetsu was telling the truth, so he decided to activate his Six Paths chakra mode, causing a terrifying aura to cover his body before he asked, what about now? Do you think I still can't? This is Six Paths chakra. Are you related to Hagoromo? Asked Black Zetsu, to which Bakurio shook his head and said, no, I achieved this through my own effort. Black Zetsu's eyes widened in amazement and he finally started to believe in Bakurio's ability to free Kagaya, and they started to make a plan together, a plan to visit the moon. Meanwhile, Minato was currently struggling to convert Obito back to the good side, but the latter simply wouldn't budge until Kushina said, you already guessed that Bakurio-kun was the one that revived us, right? Obito stared at her silently, finding this question weird before he asked, what does this have to do with anything? Just kill me already. Kushina shot him a stern look before she said, what do you think Kakashi did when he learned about us being revived? Obito's eyes suddenly widened in surprise. Don't tell me. Kushina didn't say anything and simply stared at Minato, who let out a long sigh before he teleported back to the village and came back with two people that didn't understand what was going on. Rin grew quite a lot since she got revived, which left Obito speechless when he saw her, but he easily recognized her even if she was different. Meanwhile, Kakashi stared with a dumbfounded look on his face at his old friend's face and the clear marks on it left from the injury he sustained to save his life. Then, Bakurio's words echoed in his head. The time he asked him to revive his friend, he didn't agree to it right away and just said that he will help him in the future, and now faced with this situation, he didn't know what to say other than call out his friend's name, Obito. Obito turned his face away, not wanting to face Rin in particular, who was also shocked by the current situation, but shock overwhelmed her even more when Kakashi noticed the mask laying on the ground and remembered the story Bakurio told them about the masked man that unleashed Kurama in the middle of the village, and instantly rushed at Obito and punched him in the face. How could you kill our teacher and his wife, you selfish bastard? Yelled Kakashi, while Rin immediately held him back to stop him from acting on his rage. Stop, Kakashi, she yelled. Obito flew in the air for a while before he landed on the ground and cleaned the blood from his bleeding lips before he smirked at Kakashi and said, a trash like you who kills his own teammates doesn't have the right to say anything to me. Kakashi's eyes suddenly wavered, and Rin tried to explain the situation. Obito, I don't know how you are alive, but I'm glad that you are. Please don't blame Kakashi. It was me acting selfishly back then to save the village. Obito stared coldly at Kakashi and said, I don't care. It won't change what my own eyes witnessed that day. Rin was about to convince him again when Bakurio suddenly approached them with Black Zetsu following obediently after him, to the surprise of everyone present, before he said, did your eyes see the truth? Or did they see someone else's truth? Obito turned to glare at Bakurio before he stared at Black Zetsu and said, what are you doing? Black Zetsu didn't say anything and simply stood behind Bakurio as the latter spoke. Do you think it was a coincidence that Rin got kidnapped that time, or that Kakashi was there to save her? TCH, even the fact that you received the intel about what was happening to arrive just 1 second late. Do you really think all of these are coincidences, or are you trying to lie to yourself? Obito's eyes kept flickering in uncertainty, so Bakurio turned to Black Zetsu and ordered him to tell Obito the cold hard truth about how Madara planned everything, which left him with a lost look in his eyes. Did you really not suspect anything? Asked Bakurio with a smile, as if he was staring through Obito's true mask, the mask that he was wearing over his heart, and the latter noticed this, so for the first time he spoke truthfully. This world only has despair. Even someone as great as Madara decided to rot away in a cave alone, so what's the point of having a dream if you can't achieve it? What's the point of a world that doesn't contain anything you love? Rin, Kushina, and Kakashi had sad looks on their faces when they heard this, while Minato simply closed his eyes and blamed himself for letting this happen to his student. Bakurio and Obito stared at each other for a while before the former let out a sigh and said, indeed, such pain is hard to endure, but do you really think that you are having it worse in this world than others? People still suffer from poverty from all the wars that happened between the hidden villages. Others are discriminated against since birth just because they carry many burdens such as the many Jinchuriki. Compare your life with theirs, and if that's not enough, let me show you something. Minato's heart shook slightly at the mention of how the many Jinchuriki are treated and felt glad that he got revived to be with Naruto again. Meanwhile, Obito watched as Bakuryo's eyes transformed before the latter used his Hijikaninki on him, but it wasn't to manipulate his emotions. No. It was to just show him their own hearts. Those eyes, thought Obito, and tried to avoid locking eyes with Bakuryo, but he didn't react fast enough and found himself in a weird space with the last thing he heard was Bakuryo whispering, "Heart Realm." In it he first saw an image of himself trying to reach out for all that he loved, only for them to grow further and further away from him, and they were dragged by the world itself. So a huge beast that had 10 tails formed behind him from the hatred growing in his heart and rushed to destroy the world and everything in his path. But then he saw his loved ones waving at him, Rin, Kakashi, Minato, Kushina, and they resisted the pull of the world. But his image was incapable of chasing after them as the beast behind him put its hands on his shoulders and weighed heavily on them. "This is my heart," thought Obito instinctively while putting his hand over his heart, but then something caught his eyes. It was a portal that led somewhere else and his curiosity pushed him to enter it. The moment Obito stepped through the portal, a huge change in scenery occurred and he found himself in a completely different space, but before he could even analyze it, he started falling from the sky at a very fast speed into a seemingly empty hole that nothing seemed to be able to fill it. That hole was dark and desolate in nature, and felt endless as he couldn't see its end, which brought an unknown sense of unease to his heart as he thought, "What kind of place is this?" Obito kept falling into the empty abyss at a terrifying speed and decided to turn around to stare at the hole he just fell through. He noticed above the location where he previously was that a huge eerie dark sun was floating silently and rotating around itself, and it had a distinctive horizontal slit on it which somehow reminded Obito of a closed eye. What's that ominous darkness? Why does it feel familiar? He couldn't help but put his hand over his chest where his heart should be, and he felt that this sensation was quite familiar. It reminded him of the beast that he saw in the previous vision, although this one appeared much purer in its malice nature. This was of course the dormant dark seed hiding in Bakuryo's heart. To him it was something that darkness uses to spy on him, which is why it manifested as an eye in his heart realm. As for Obito, his dark seed was what fueled his hatred and led him down the wrong path, and he ended up mobilizing it to try to gain strength, which is why it manifested in the form of a beast. Obito didn't know about the existence of the dark seeds, but if he did, he would have instantly recognized how much they resembled Madara's seal that he cast on him to control him. But for now, he simply buried down his doubts and turned his attention to the bottom of the abyss, where he finally noticed a difference. There were light spots flying around in this abyss and they seemed completely out of place, and the abyss seemed about to extinguish their light at any time. What are these? Thought Obito before he narrowed his eyes and tried to analyze the light spots and found out that they appeared to be humanoids. Although he couldn't see their faces, but some of them, he was still able to recognize them from certain characteristics such as their hair, like Kushina and Minato, although most of the rest appeared like complete strangers to him. He noticed that all of these lights were trying to push a slightly bigger light spot out of the abyss, and after staring at it closely, his eyes widened in surprise when he found that it appeared to be Bakuryo. The light spots would take turns trying to drag him out of the abyss, but they seem to be exhausting their light every time they try, so they have to rest and recover. However, their efforts seemed meaningless and they were barely able to keep Bakuryo floating and not fall further into the abyss. What's going on? If previously that was my own heart, is this supposed to be Bakuryo's? What kind of situation is this? Muttered Obito, feeling his heart shaking at the thought of being trapped in such a place with no ability to struggle or leave at all. Suddenly, a voice echoed from beside him, startling him as Bakuryo appeared and said, "Do you understand?" Obito turned quickly to Bakuryo and asked, "What's going on here? Where am I? Is this the effect of your Mangekyo Sharingan?" "That's correct. This place is called the Heart Realm and it shows you your true self when used," replied Bakuryo calmly. After his Hijikaninki reached level 30, he gained this new ability that allowed him to see his own heart, and it helped him greatly in understanding himself. Obito frowned at him and asked, "Why are you showing me all of this?" He couldn't help but shoot the trapped Bakurio a look and gulped slightly at the eeriness of this place. Meanwhile, Bakurio simply shook his head and replied with a distant look in his eyes, "I just wanted to show you what despair looks like. For me, I can barely struggle to maintain my sanity thanks to my loved ones and strong will, and I can do nothing to face this endless abyss, but for you, you could have always turned around and faced that monster." Obito's eyes widened slightly as he felt the desolate aura coming from Bakurio before he asked hesitantly, "Haven't you seen how big that monster is?" Hearing this, Bakurio smiled at Obito and said, "Indeed, facing it alone is a huge burden, but you are not alone. You have Minato, Kushina, Kakashi, and Rin." Obito lowered his head when heard this and he didn't know what to say, but Bakurio calmly put his hand over his shoulder and said, "You can also rely on me. I would love to add another firefly to illuminate my life." Obito stared at Bakurio's smiling face with a dazed look and he understood. After all he saw in this place, the man in front of him was in no position to help others. In fact, he couldn't even help himself. But he was trying, just in the hope to add another light spot to this endless abyss that no one even knew he was probably trapped in. A tear found itself falling from his eyes and he instinctively raised his hand to touch his cheek only to realize that he was back in the real world and Bakurio's eyes were already back to normal. "Bakurio-kun, did you do something to Obito-kun?" asked Rin while standing protectively in front of Obito, and Bakurio simply smiled at her and said, "Oh, the moment your old friend arrives you forget your new friend, huh?" Rin shot him an embarrassed look and complained, "It's not like that. I'm just teasing you," replied Bakurio with a grin which made Rin pout and brought a smile to everyone's faces except for Obito, who kept staring at Bakurio silently while thinking, Why can he act like that despite everything he's going through? But then Obito suddenly noticed the look on everyone's eyes when they stared at Bakurio when he interacted with him. They clearly adored him each in their own way, which is surprising considering his true nature. Seeing this, Minato suddenly took him to the side and said to him once they were alone, "Are you surprised?" Obito nodded absent-mindedly and he couldn't help but instinctively ask, "Teacher, how could he act like that? I've seen his heart. That abyss was unforgiving and he could barely hold on inside of it, not to mention the huge black sun lying in wait for him at the exit." Minato's deep blue eyes flickered slightly while he watched Rin questioning Kisame and Black Zetsu about their weird appearances while Kushina and Bakurio were talking to Nagato, and he felt delighted that Obito called him teacher although he didn't seem to realize it. How could he act like this, huh? This is actually one of the reasons I decided to put my trust in him. I could see it, that empty look in his eyes since the moment I met him, but he never stopped struggling, which earned my respect. His will is beyond your imagination and mine. Obito nodded calmly before he said, "I guess I failed you." But Minato stared deeply at Obito before he shook his head and said, "No, it's not completely your fault. Some things are beyond our control." Obito noticed a terrible coldness in Minato's eyes that sent a chill down his spine. It was a look he only saw on his teacher's face when the latter saw Kushina's miserable state while he was extracting Kurama from her. But this time, it wasn't directed at him, but he noticed Minato glancing for just an instant at his heart and he was reminded of that huge beast that fed on his darkness. Does teacher know something I don't? Wondered Obito while feeling that the world was suddenly starting to become much more complicated than it already is. Are you really from the Uzumaki clan? Asked Kushina while staring at Nagato's emaciated appearance, but what attracted her the most were his purple eyes that had many spirals in them. I've never heard of anyone in our clan awakening this kind of eyes. Did he get them from a different bloodline of his? Wondered Kushina while Nagato didn't bother to respond to her and simply stared at Obito and Black Zetsu that seemed to have been brainwashed by the young man that effortlessly defeated him. Escaping is not an option, but I should at least create an opportunity for Konan to escape, thought Nagato, but then his eyes suddenly widened in terror as his world turned into slow motion and he watched as Bakurio's focus suddenly shifted to Konan before he disappeared like a flash and appeared right near her and started using the gentle fist on her to block her chakra channels and her ability to use chakra along with it. Although he wasn't intending to be lethal, so he didn't block her necessary channels. "Bakurio-kun, what are you doing?" asked Kushina with a frown that soon turned into surprise as Nagato glared at Konan before he said to Bakurio, "Thank you." Bakurio calmly nodded, but his eyes never left Konan. This girl is quite loyal. She was actually ready to blow this whole place up if I didn't stop her. Thought Bakurio while watching Conan squirming in pain before he explained the situation to Kushina and eased her worries. Nagato, what do you think about joining Konoha? Asked Bakurio suddenly, which surprised Nagato as the latter smirked at him and said, why would I join you? Bakurio smirked back at him and took out a lethal kunai and started waving it in front of his face. Well, for starters, it will save yours and Conan's lives. Nagato's eyes narrowed dangerously before he activated the repulsive force of his Rinnegan in an effort to push Bakurio away, but it didn't work as Bakurio controlled the gravity around him to negate the attraction of the Rinnegan, which was only possible thanks to his terrifying mastery. Haven't you learned your lesson? That won't work on me, said Bakurio, causing a sense of fear to be born in Nagato's heart. The Rinnegan that never failed him was now appearing more and more useless. What kind of chakra control is that? This shouldn't be humanly possible, he thought, and rightly so. After all, even someone as great as Onoki can only use earth release to negate gravity and make himself weightless, but that's only because the attraction force of the earth is almost constant, so after constant training, he managed to fine-tune his jutsu to suit it. Just like a lock having a specific key. Nagato is a genius who mastered all 5 chakra releases when he was just a kid, easily understood this principle, which is why he was terrified by Bakurio's ability, as he appeared to have the key to every possible lock, and no matter how Nagato changed his attraction or repulsive force, Bakurio would negate them every time. This was of course all thanks to Bakurio's evolved chakra control mastery. After mastering the 6-path Sage Chakra, he fulfilled the condition for his chakra control mastery to advance, which was to create a chakra that was 50 times stronger than normal chakra. Thanks to this, his chakra control evolved into energy control, and it increased his control of chakra by a factor of 3 directly, and it was slowly increasing as its level goes up. Not to mention, in addition to all of this, Bakurio also had his multitask ability. Seeing that Nagato was still acting foolish, Bakurio decided to cut through the chase and started brainwashing him just like he did to Obito. He showed him the lie of his eyes and that they weren't truly his, as well as how foolish his actions were, since at their very basis, he was just a pawn in Obito's plan. Nagato's dream after falling into despair from all the wars he experienced when he was a child and seeing his parents being murdered in front of him was to gain absolute strength to create a world that had no war. However, Obito misled him into thinking that the best way to do that was by collecting the various tailed beasts and feeding them to the Geto Mazo status that can only be controlled by the Rinnegan, and that once he collects all tailed beasts, he would gain an unstoppable weapon that would help him achieve his dream of world peace. But now, Bakurio showed him how everything was a lie. In fact, this chain of manipulation stretched all the way back to Madara, who was tricked by Black Zetsu. Was my whole life a lie? Asked Nagato with a pained look on his face, and at this point, Minato and Obito approached as well, and the latter said with an apologetic look, "Sorry Nagato, but what Bakurio said was mostly the truth. Was my dream foolish?" He wondered, but someone suddenly yelled at him, "No, our life wasn't a lie. We struggled so much to reach this point, and those struggles can't be faked." This was none other than Conan, who was crying as she stared at the lost look on Nagato's face, and the latter was dazed by her until Bakurio smiled and spoke. "Indeed, she's right, plus your dream isn't dead yet. We share the same dream after all, and as long as I'm alive, I will make sure to achieve it." Nagato could instinctively tell that Bakurio was telling the truth, so he calmly closed his eyes before he opened them with a stronger determination than he ever had, and he directly stabbed his eyes and took out both of his Rinnegan and said to Bakurio, "Take them, they burdened my body for all my life only to keep me blind." Bakurio was taken by surprise, but it was a pleasant one as he smiled and thought, "It seems like I don't need to persuade him." Nagato! Yelled Conan with a distressed look on her face as Nagato bled from his eyes, and she heard him say, "Please spare Conan, she was only following my foolishness." This was the real reason for giving up his eyes. He noticed Bakurio's in them and decided to take the initiative to give them away, because in reality, he knew Bakurio could take them forcefully anyways. "No, if you die, I will die with you," she yelled while crying, and this scene made everyone look at them differently. Meanwhile, Bakurio didn't waste any time as he handed the eyes to a true clone of his that was hiding in his shadow before it disappeared again. "If I may say, please spare them both, they can be of great help to whatever you want to achieve," spoke Obito suddenly, which surprised not only Bakurio's group, but also Nagato and Konan, as they didn't expect Obito to vouch for them in this situation. I agree, but they are very dangerous, and letting them free might be dangerous, spoke Kakashi as he analyzed the situation coldly, but Kushina and Rin, who started to sympathize with Konan, immediately sided with Obito, which left Kakashi speechless as he thought. You traitors! Meanwhile, Minato simply stared at Bakurio's shadow before he said, as fellow students, I'm willing to give them another chance. Bakurio nodded at him, since it was also his intention to spare them before he activated his Six Paths Charka mode and knelt beside Nagato. What are you trying to do? Struggled Konan, trying to protect Nagato, but Kushina held her back with a smile on her face and said, Don't worry. Konan for some reason felt like she could trust this warm smile, so she watched as Bakurio put both of his hands on Nagato's closed eyes, and not long after, smoke started coming from them and the latter slowly opened them to show the eyes that truly belonged to him, and they were just like Kushina's violet eyes. Seeing Nagato's eyes healed by Bakurio's chakra, Black Zetsu was more and more sure that Bakurio could help him revive Kagaya. Regenerating the eye is no easy thing to do, and it wasn't just the effect of his Six Paths chakra that allowed him to do it. He probably has a terrifying level of mastery over both the yin and yang releases as well, just like Hagoromo and Hamura, he thought with a surprised look on his face. Meanwhile, Bakurio had a satisfied look on his face, glad with what he achieved, and said to Nagato, I already cut off your connection to the Geto Mazo status and sealed it away. And now, with the burden of having those eyes gone, you will slowly recover back to a normal state. Konan's eyes widened in delight after hearing this and almost started cheering, but she noticed the frown on Nagato's face and held herself back. What do you want from us after all of this? You are already so strong. Having both you and the Yellow Flash in Konoha is already enough to deter any force that might try to oppose you, asked Nagato while staring at Bakurio's blood-red eyes seriously, and Obito too was intrigued by this question. My enemy is far beyond your imagination, and I need every single force I can gather just in the hope of maybe beating it one day, which is why I want you to join Konoha, replied Bakurio with a sigh, and Nagato couldn't help but ask in surprise. There no such a person that exists in this world? Don't tell me. Nagato suddenly realized a little about what Bakurio was implying. His enemy wasn't something from this world. Bakurio remained silent, and seeing this, Black Zetsu suddenly asked, What do you plan to do with the Rinnegan? Hearing this, Bakurio smirked at him and said, Of course use it, and just as his words died down, 7 true clones of his appeared from his shadow, and they had one thing in common, they all had the Rinnegan on their eyes. This was one of the abilities of the Rinnegan. It allows the user to use black rods, which are also special receivers, and plant them inside 6 bodies, which can then each use one of the 6 paths of the Rinnegan abilities. In Bakurio's case, he used his own true clones since he couldn't find better bodies anyways. Although this might change in the future. What a monster, he can already control the Rinnegan to this degree. Thought Black Zetsu and Nagato before the latter asked, Aren't you feeling any strain from using the eye? Bakurio nodded at him and responded, Of course I do, but it's far less than what you felt because my clan's bloodline is more suitable for it than yours. This answer made sense to Nagato and the others since the Uchiha were famous for their dojutsu, but Bakurio decided to not tell them that this Rinnegan was the next evolution of the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. Nodding to Bakurio, Nagato said, Fine then, we are willing to join you, however I can't promise about the rest of the members of the Akatsuki. Kushina couldn't help but ask curiously after hearing this, who are the rest of the members of the Akatsuki? This time it was Konan that replied as she said, Excluding me and Nagato, the other members are Juzo Biwa from the Mist, Sasori of the Sand, Deidara, Kakuzu, Hidan, Orochimaru, and lastly Zetsu, whom you already met. Kisame and Madara, or as you call him Obito, were planning to join us right now to deal with you, but now it doesn't seem necessary anymore. Bakurio nodded at her and his eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of someone, and he asked coldly, Call for a meeting of all the members to this base, there's a bug I want to catch among them. Seeing the terrifying cold look in Bakurio's eyes, everyone felt a chill, and Minato couldn't help but wonder, what could make Bakurio-kun feel like this? But that look quickly disappeared just like an illusion after Nagato nodded at him and used his astral projection jutsu to communicate with all the members and set up a meeting with them. After some time, Nagato spoke calmly, Some members are doing missions, so the meeting will be held 2 days later, Bakurio nodded at him and thought, this is perfect. Before he told Minato and the rest that they should leave and inform Fugaku that they were about to establish an alliance with the village hidden in the rain since Nagato was its hidden ruler before he gestured for Black Zetsu to follow him. After running to an isolated place, Bakurio set up new barriers to further isolate the area before he spoke. Zetsu, do you know everything about Keigaya's life? Zetsu froze slightly and was contemplating whether to lie or not, but seeing the cold look in Bakurio's eyes, he decided not to and spoke truthfully. Yes, I do. Good, there's something that keeps bothering me. Why did she decide to reclaim her chakra suddenly after she gave it up? Bakurio was really confused by this question, especially since he didn't understand much about Keigaya's origins except for her having come from another world. Zetsu contemplated silently before he spoke. Keigaya-sama isn't a resident from another world, she's a member of the Otsutsuki clan and you can consider her as an alien. And long ago when she came to this world, she didn't arrive by herself. Instead, she was accompanied by another member of the Otsutsuki clan, someone far stronger than her. Bakurio was startled by this sudden information and seeing the clear shock on his face, Zetsu smirked and said, you said you sealed the Geto Mazo status, right? Bakurio nodded at him. That's right, do you know what that status is? Asked Zetsu with the same smirk on his face, and Bakurio responded doubtfully, isn't it the husk of the 10 tails? I believe this is what's left of the 10 tails after Hagoromo sealed all of its chakra in his body and became the first Jinchuriki, right? Zetsu nodded in appreciation, you really know a lot. However, where do you think the 10 tails came from? Bakurio didn't know how to answer this since he was always confused regarding this matter, and noticing this, Zetsu calmly explained to him, when members of the Otsutsuki clans arrive to a world, they only have one intention, and that's to absorb all the energy it has to strengthen their bodies. However, that would take a long time if done manually, so the clan devised a method to hasten the process, and that method resulted in the creation of the 10 tails. So the 10 tails isn't even something out of this world, huh? Wondered Bakurio as Zetsu followed up by saying, this method however doesn't just end here. Instead, the sacrifice of a member of the Otsutsuki clan is required for the 10 tails to transform into a god tree, which will then start consuming all the natural energies of the world and eventually produces a chakra fruit, and that's why the members of the Otsutsuki clan travel in pairs. Bakurio contemplated all of this information before he asked, what happened to the other member that came with Keigaya? Zetsu fell silent for a while before he said, it was planned that Keigaya-sama would be the sacrifice and he would revive her at a later date since he was a higher-ranking member than her, but after coming to this world, something changed inside of her and she decided to sacrifice him instead and take the fruit for herself and give chakra back to the world. However, she feared that other members of her clan would eventually come to hunt them down after realizing that they didn't come back and tried to retrieve that chakra to fight them. But it backfired on her in the end. Hearing this, Bakurio fell silent as he remembered his meeting with Keigaya and concluded that darkness probably had a hand in this. After all, why would it let a world under its control lose all of its energy? Not to mention that this was a great opportunity to create more darkness and negativity through Keigaya. With this in mind, Bakurio turned his attention to the moon and planned for his next move. Freeing Keigaya. I have 2 days to work with, but I guess it will be just enough time for me to free Keigaya, thought Bakurio as a plan quickly formed in his head. According to what he learned so far from Zetsu, the Geto Mazo status was originally sealed in the core of the moon, but when Madara awakened his Rinnegan, he summoned it and used it to extend his lifespan as much as possible until he found someone to inherit his will, which ended up being Obito. What intrigued Bakurio the most about this was that he can reverse summon the Geto Mazo back to the core of the moon, which would make his job easier, so without wasting any time, he summoned his clone that had the Rinnegan and was testing its various abilities as well as Zetsu and said, let's go. Where? Asked Zetsu in confusion, and Bakurio simply smirked at him and said, of course to the moon. Bakurio's true clone also shared his smirk before he clasped his hands together and said, come out. Right after his words died down, the Geto Mazo status appeared after him, so he followed up by manipulating it to eat them. Inside the status, the trio found it unnervingly dark, almost like they were about to get devoured at any time, but Bakurio didn't mind at all, and the same was true for the true clone as he activated the Rinnegan again and reverse summoned them to the core of the moon. Ellipsis. At the surface of the moon, a young man with pale skin, shaggy white hair, attractive facial features, and 6 Magatama designs tattooed on his collarbones to resemble a necklace was sitting alone inside of his castle with his eyes closed. He was wearing a high-collared kimono with a black obi, over which he wears a pale green sash tied at the right shoulder. On the back of his kimono is the Otsutsuki clan branch family emblem of a yellow crest depicting a sun enclosed in a crescent moon. Beneath his robe, he wears black fingerless gloves, long black pants, and black shinobi sandals. Thanks to his strong senses, he felt something changing near the core of the moon and he couldn't help but wonder, what's going on? Whose presence is this? Curious, he ordered his servants to go investigate if anything was wrong with the energy vessel while he himself went to investigate the weird presence he felt near the core of the moon. Something to note was that all of the servants had their eyes closed, and they moved in a rigid way making them appear like puppets. Meanwhile, inside the core of the moon, Bakurio as well sensed the weird presence above him on the surface of the moon and it felt familiar to him. This smell, this presence, it reminds me of the Hyuga, he thought, but something else soon diverted his attention from it. A terrifying amount of energy that he never expected he would encounter in this place and it also felt familiar. Zetsu, what's going on? Are there people living on the moon? And what's with this energy? Asked Bakurio with a cold look and Zetsu knew that he better have a good answer for this otherwise, things won't end well for him so he hurriedly replied. I really don't know, this is my first time here on the moon and I didn't expect that it would have traces of life, but I think this is the doing of Hamura, Keigaya's second son. I can feel that the strong energy stored here in the moon resembles his chakra signature. Bakurio sensed that Black Zetsu was telling the truth so he nodded at him and thought to himself, this is out of my expectations. However, it might be a good opportunity for me. It's possible that this is what I've been searching for so that my Byakugan can evolve. With this thought in mind, Bakurio turned his attention to his true clone and noticed that he appears to have lost a lot of his chakra so he transferred some of his own to him to get him back to full capacity and threw a chakra regeneration pill at him and his clone nodded back at him knowing perfectly what to do. Meanwhile, Bakurio shot Black Zetsu a cold look and said, "Stay here, I will go investigate what's going on." And without waiting for the tricky guy to answer, Bakurio directly used his earth release and traveled through the moon all the way to the surface. Just as he left the ground, he felt a terrifying compressed wall made of chakra coming his way and behind it was a young man that was wearing Otsutsuki clothing. Time appeared almost still in Bakurio's eyes as he analyzed his surroundings. I can breathe, it seems like this moon is far closer to the earth than I initially thought, although it's a bit difficult, and who is this guy? Why is he using a technique similar to the Hyuga? Wondered Bakurio before he sent a chakra wall of his own and negated his enemy's attack. Tonari felt the similar attack of his opponent and he couldn't help but ask, who are you? While inside he was thinking, is this guy from the Hyuga clan? No, his eyes feel different. Is this guy another pawn of that darkness? Thought Bakurio with a cruel look on his eyes and Tonari could feel a terrifying killing intent directed at him as if death itself was staring at him. Who am I isn't important, what's important is understanding what's going on here on the moon, and I have a quick way to find out, spoke Bakurio before he disappeared and repapered in front of Tonari and engaged with him in a taijutsu fight using his gentle fist to immobilize him quickly. To Bakurio's surprise, his blind enemy was very skilled in hand-to-hand combat and despite Bakurio not going all out, it was still quite clear that the man in front of him had a terrifying mastery in taijutsu but he suddenly made a big effort to create some distance away from Bakurio and hurriedly said, wait, this is the gentle fist of the Hyuga clan right? Are you a member of that clan? What if I was? Asked Bakurio coldly and refrained from attacking once more as this young man reminded him of Mukai's inhuman taijutsu mastery. I'm Tonari Otsutsuki, a descendant of Hamura Otsutsuki. Spoke Tonari with a prideful tone, but Bakurio was surprised and ignored his tone. Hamura has other descendants. It seems like Zetsu was right. That energy probably had something to do with Hamura as well. What's this guy planning? He wondered thoughtfully as plans started forming in his head on how to deal with the young man in front of him. Meanwhile, at the core of the moon, Bakurio's true clone approached Keigaya's seal with Zetsu and they found a huge tablet that had a sun and a crescent moon symbol on them. However, they weren't that simple as the true clone can tell that those two symbols were made of extremely complicated seals. Not to mention that both of them had six-path chakra as well as a weird type of chakra. The true clone recognized one type of chakra to be similar to the Rinnegan. As for the second one, it resembled the chakra they were sensing here on the moon. What do you think? Can you remove this seal? Asked Zetsu with a worried look, and the true clone calmly stared at the seal. It seems like you knew what you were doing. Thought out history, huh? Only a true descendant of Hagoromo or Hamura can remove this seal, and you are in luck since I have both Asura's and Indra's chakra in me, replied the true clone before he moved into action. Black Zetsu watched in wonder as Bakuryo's true clone started releasing two familiar auras from his body. Amazing, how could he have such pure chakra from both Indra and Asura? This is unprecedented in comparison to any of their reincarnations, he thought. Meanwhile, the true clone calmly used his energy control and manipulated the minuscule amount of Asura's and Indra's chakra he had on his body. The former gathered at the palm of his right hand and it shined with a strong yellow light, while the latter gathered at the palm of his left hand and it shined with an eerie white light. Then, he pushed his hands into the stone that was the core of Keigaya's seal, causing the sun and moon symbols on it to slowly light up. It's working, exclaimed Black Zetsu with an excited look on his face, but he soon noticed that sweat started falling from the true clone's head. This seal is truly complicated, just having the required chakra isn't enough to open it. Thankfully my mastery in seals has also evolved, thought the true clone as his chakra drained quickly, and just when he was about to run out completely out of it, the sound of a lock opening reverberated from the stone tablet. Right after that, the silhouette of a woman slowly emerged in front of them. This barely worked, muttered the true clone while staring at Keigaya, who slowly opened her eyes and stared at him, and Black Zetsu, who immediately knelt down and said, Keigaya-sama, you are finally free from your seal. Please use this guy's main body that's on the surface of the moon. It's very compatible with you. Just as Black Zetsu finished saying this, the true clone kicked him away, making him smash in the walls of the small cave before he calmly turned to Keigaya and spoke to her with a smile. That was expected. We finally meet again. Keigaya nodded at him with a blank look in her eyes as she thought, how did he escape my infinite Tsukuyomi? However, the true clone quickly cut her off from her thoughts as he said, we can't keep wasting too much time. This seal actually helped you preserve your soul throughout the years, but now that you are freed from it, you will dissipate if you remain outside like this. Keigaya nodded in agreement, but she didn't want to take over the body of the man in front of her as she felt a weird connection with him. However, the true clone soon gave her a solution. As Black Zetsu said previously, my body is indeed suitable for you. Use this clone of mine. Then, another true clone appeared from his shadow. This one, however, didn't have the Rinnegan. But, it was still as he just described, very suitable for her since he had Uchiha and Hyuga bloodlines, and only lacked an Uzumaki or Senju one to gather all main bloodlines that came from Keigaya. Seeing the new clone appearing in front of her, Keigaya communicated with Black Zetsu and he reluctantly agreed with her and came out of the cave he just created from the true clone's kick and suddenly stabbed the new clone that appeared. Bakuryo purposefully left a piece of his soul inside that clone so that he can observe what was happening inside of it, and the moment Black Zetsu stabbed him, he felt the whole genetic structure of his body changing rapidly. His bloodline, chakra, and even gender. All changed in a matter of seconds as Keigaya followed suit and merged with the clone that was slowly transforming to resemble her. Then, surprisingly, he felt the part of his soul that was in the clone returning to him, and he instantly understood that it was the doing of Keigaya. It's unfortunate that you won't be able to return to your peak like this, spoke Black Zetsu with an annoyed look, but Keigaya simply shook her head in her new body and said, I don't mind, at least I'm free again and I can live. Then she turned to the true clone and stared at him gratefully. The true clone noticed that she only had her Byakugan and didn't awaken a third eye in this form. But everything will change once the real body arrives and complete some preparations before they make her recover her true strength. Ellipsis. On the surface of the moon, Bakuryo's discussion with Tonari escalated quickly, from the latter asking him if he was a member of the Hyuga clan to demanding that he give him his eyes. You are quite arrogant, aren't you? I wonder what makes you think you can demand anything from me, spoke Bakuryo calmly as his eyes slowly transformed into his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan and the eerie aura around him intensified. I will show you, spoke Tonari eerily, and right after he finished, many puppets came rushing from the distance and started attacking Bakuryo with yellow explosives. They are using that weird energy as fuel for their attacks, and it seems quite potent. Thought Bakurio calmly before he suddenly disappeared at a terrifying speed and easily immobilized every single puppet before he appeared in front of Tonari, startling him. You. Tonari tried to retreat, but it was too late as Bakurio simply muttered, "It's time to remove another pawn." Jikaninki. The moment Bakurio said this, a huge seed of darkness that was rooted deeply in Tonari's heart was easily crushed, and the latter suddenly felt all of his hate for mankind lessen considerably. "What did you do to me?" asked Tonari with a surprised tone as he held his hand over his heart, feeling that it became lighter. "Were you by any chance planning to do something stupid?" asked Bakurio, and Tonari suddenly froze and said, "I was going to follow the teachings of my ancestor and rid the world of the people that misuse chakra to create wars. That's no stupid thing." Hearing this, Bakurio let out a sigh before he smacked him in the head, nailing him in the ground and leaving only his head out, which caused Tonari to feel the whole world spinning around him as Bakurio spoke. "Your ancestor never wanted such a thing, otherwise they wouldn't have taught the world how to use chakra, you idiot." Tonari barely heard what Bakurio said, but the latter didn't bother with him anymore as he turned around and faced the new people that appeared from the ground behind him, and at their lead was Kagaya, who approached silently. "I was waiting for you. Look into my eyes. This would make my job easier since your situation is quite tricky compared to normal people," spoke Bakurio calmly, and only Kagaya knew what he meant as she could feel the darkness hiding in her soul trying to manipulate her and make her leave this place, but she tried her best to keep control over her body and started at Bakurio's eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. Just as she did, she felt an invisible light cleansing both her body and her soul. And just like that, a huge burden was suddenly erased from her soul and cleared her thoughts. "Finally, I can act as myself," spoke Kagaya softly with a sad look in her eyes as she remembered everything this darkness made her do, including fighting her own sons, which she barely held herself from killing. "You are free now. You don't need to fear misusing your power anymore," spoke Bakurio gently. He knew what it felt like to be manipulated into hurting those close to you, and Kagaya probably suffered for ages with this burden. "Unfortunately, I lost all my powers," she spoke while shaking her head, although Bakurio saw no regret in her eyes, which made him smile slightly at her before he said, "Who said that I was done with your recovery?" Kagaya's eyes widened at this, and Black Zetsu directly denied him as he said, "Unless you gather all tailed beasts or find another chakra fruit, Kagaya-sama won't restore back to her full strength." Bakurio shook his head at him before he nodded at his true clone, who calmly smiled before he presented Kagaya with a pill, then he instantly disappeared into Bakurio's shadow. "Eat it," said Bakurio calmly with his eyes turning back to a normal Sharingan. "Kagaya-sama, you shouldn't." Zetsu tried to stop her, but Kagaya simply smiled and said, "If I can't trust my savior, what's the point of living again? Life will be as empty as it was inside that seal." Then without hesitation, she ate the chakra recovery pill. Thank you for listening, guys. See you in the next part.